This webinar is on COVID-19 and college planning. Many families that I've met with, and even just reading things in the news, have shown me that families are very much concerned right now about COVID-19, how it's going to affect either their incoming student, maybe they're a current student, or maybe you're even an adult learner joining this call. That's an important piece that we're going to look at too. But this whole webinar is looking at COVID-19, how it's changing both the student experience and then also changing higher ed in general. So hopefully this will give you some good insights. And then at the very end of this slide deck, I actually am going to speak about what you need to do in terms of next steps that will help you along the line as you do your college planning. So the first thing I want to do is I want to ask some polls, and actually Zoom has a really neat feature here that I'm going to go ahead and launch polling here. So you should be able to view these questions, and if you have access right now, if you could go ahead and answer those. The first question that I have for you is, are you here for yourself or someone else? So do you have a freshman in high school, sophomore in high school, junior, senior, or do you have a child that's a current college student potentially? The next question that we're going to look at here is, what are your biggest concerns when it comes to higher education and COVID-19? So maybe it's current financial situation, financial viability of your college choice. So maybe you're worried about whether the college is going to continue to be around. We're going to talk about that. Maybe it's about losing the traditional college experience. And then number three, we're going to look at, are you currently working with a professional to guide you through the college planning process? So go ahead and take a few moments to answer those questions. That'll help guide me as I go through this presentation to answer some of the questions you might have when it comes to COVID-19 and college planning. Looks like we've got some responses coming in. Got it. So I'm going to focus, at least for the folks that we have on the call right now, probably a lot about what it means for the traditional college experience and then online learning, which are two of the main concerns that I see a lot of folks talk about right now. They're wondering about the switch to online learning. How's it going to affect their student? And then also that switch to the end of what we would consider the traditional college experience. So let's talk about the impact and challenges of COVID-19 right now. And hopefully I'm going to give you some insights, because if you don't track higher education like I do on a daily basis, you may not know how this is affecting college in particular. We obviously know of many of the effects that have happened over time in the economy, but COVID-19 in particular has hit higher education extremely hard. And so many higher ed institutions right now are scrambling because they're losing income, and they have to figure out a way either to fill that with some other revenue source or to cut back on costs. And many are cutting back on costs. But across the board, from what I've read, and many admissions officers right now are weighing in on this, but most institutions are expecting a 15% reduction in student enrollment. This is bad for multiple reasons. One, as you might imagine, it means that the funding dries up. Many private schools across the United States right now, honestly, are year to year on cash. Some have larger endowments, but most do not, meaning that this 15% salary reduction has to come out of the budget somewhere. If it's not being paid in tuition revenues, then it has to get cut in some other fashion. And what this means is that there are extensive furloughs, layoffs, and program offering reductions across the United States. We have, I believe, around 4,000 higher ed institutions in the United States right now. So many of them are going this option, which is important to keep in mind when you're engaging in college planning, because as your junior goes off to college, as your senior goes off to college, or maybe you're returning to college as we speak, your program may or may not exist when you get back to campus. You may or may not see faculty that you're used to seeing because maybe they got furloughed or laid off. These are really important considerations, and you need to do a little bit of research to make sure that not only your college is viable, but the programs that you're looking at are viable as well. State schools are in a particular conundrum when it comes to COVID, because as COVID hits the economy, as we look at upwards to 20, 25% unemployment as people get laid off, et cetera, that means that tax revenues decrease. And even for those institutions that maybe have good funding from the state, they're going to see it decrease simply because there's not as many tax dollars going into the economy right now. So state schools have that percentage. Now, no state school is 100% funded anymore by the state, not any that I know of, but that may be 18%, 20%, 25% that they get from the state. They're going to see that decreased. And for larger state institutions, that could be 10 or hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it can be a lot of money when we're looking at it that way. And then, as you might imagine, and as you all put in the polls, there's increased blended and online offerings that are the transition point right now from going to face, moving more towards that. And when I say blended, what I mean by blended is that there are online, fully online options where maybe your class is meeting together via Zoom like this, or maybe your class is meeting asynchronously, which means that they meet at different times. You can log in whenever you want to complete your work, but it's still a totally online option. Then you have blended offerings, which might be some face-to-face, and then also some online. And that's really popular right now. And many schools are looking at that as an option, maybe to decrease the face-to-face class component, where they can allow for social distancing within the room requirements. Or maybe they're looking at it simply for the full class, but they want that face-to-face component and just kind of see it play out, see what happens. Now, this is a really unique time to be in higher education. This is the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is higher ed's big newspaper or periodical, whatever you want to look at it as. And they actually have a layoff tracker that's going through all the different colleges and how they're making cuts. And you can see, I'm in the Kansas City area. You can look around at all the colleges in our area and you can see through a simple Google search that many of them are taking this quite seriously. It's impacting their budget extensively. And you can even see on this employment plummets graph, it's pretty intense in terms of how it's affecting the staff piece. So how is this going to affect the college experience for the student? Well, there's widespread confusion about what fall is going to look like, and it really varies from school to school. So this is important. It's going to lead into my action steps at the end of this, but we're going to look at how do we keep tabs on the colleges that are maybe on our school list, for instance, to make sure that we know what fall is going to look like. We're making sure they're a viable institution in this crisis, et cetera. Increased online and blended experiences, we've talked about that. But what may not be as intuitive for some is that there will be less faculty because many schools are allowed to fire tenured faculty in environments like this. It's called retrenchment, I believe, is the specific contractual term. And so many PhDs, even if you're tenure track right now, and tenure track meaning that they have lifelong employment, so to speak, at the university, many are or may not be there because the college is allowed to fire them at this point because of the financial dire straits. The other piece, and a lot of times when there's reductions like this across campuses, staff get laid off even in higher numbers than faculty in almost all cases. And so this means support programs like counseling, tutoring, advising, you name it on college campuses, student activities. A lot of times those staff will get furloughed or completely removed from the equation altogether. And so you're going to see a decrease in the services offered to students. Precarious housing arrangements is another piece that you have to think about. Many colleges right now are looking at, are we going to still have dual occupancy residence halls, or are we only going to allow one person per room for social distancing requirements? Those are interesting discussions that many colleges are having right now. And keep in mind, this is also a revenue stream. So they're making less money even through housing, which is traditionally a really profitable auxiliary enterprise. And it may mean it's more expensive to you as well, because it's to be determined if the college is going to charge you for that single occupancy rate, which is a higher rate than the double occupancy. We'll see. It will probably vary college to college. Out-of-state and international students, may choose to stay home. And some international students may not be even allowed to enter back into the country to go to school. This can be a major thing for state institutions that have admitted many international students and many out-of-state students, again, affecting their funding streams. There's also right now a call to suspend rankings in this time. And so you might see your rankings go away. Many families use that to look at what schools they want to go to. Take-home testing is another thing that we're starting to see with AP tests in particular. So that's been kind of an interesting transition for many families that are looking to go to college. And then when it comes to sports, we don't know when they're gonna start back again. The NCAA just gave a green light for training. We don't know when sports are actually going to start. And so if you're looking for sports scholarships as you go into college, we're not really sure what that'll look like either. And the best thing for you to do is to really talk with your coach and try to figure out a timeline. But many coaches don't know because these associations like the NAIA, the NCAA, they're the ones that are really going to be looking at what this transition looks like. And this is affecting colleges across the spectrum. So a case study to look at is the University of Cambridge. There are actually no face-to-face classes, and this is an extremely prestigious university, no face-to-face classes until summer of 2021. It's pretty interesting. And there are other colleges in England in particular that have taken this route. Others, again, may be doing face-to-face. Some colleges are doing face-to-face. Some are doing online. Some are doing blended. For returning and graduate students, one thing that, again, may not be intuitive for many students is if they decide to maybe come home, stay at community college, go cheaper, and transfer back, there could be issues with transfer scholarships, losing initial scholarships from your freshman year, and then inability to transfer in and out. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Make sure if you are going to maybe remove yourself from an out-of-state school or a private school to go somewhere cheaper for the moment because your situation has changed, you need to make sure that there's going to be some transfer there. So talk with the advisor at your home school, talk with the advisor of the school that you're looking at, make sure that there's some type of reciprocity there. In the short term, graduating students, as you might imagine, with unemployment maybe reaching as high as 25%, are going to have an extremely hard time finding work. When seasoned candidates and folks with experience come back into the job market, it makes it hard for them to get work. And then not only that, but there's decreased opportunities in general across the board. Things like internships are being canceled, and many of them aren't going virtual. Research prospects with faculty being canceled because the faculty aren't allowed back in the labs right now, et cetera. So many opportunities are being dampened down. Now, when it comes to faculty in particular, I had mentioned this earlier, that some faculty are going to get let go during this time. And faculty if you get tenure, you get lifetime employment. So that's a pretty extreme measure for an educational institution to take. But what does this mean for them? It means disrupted research, heavier teaching loads, greater responsibilities outside of their teaching requirements, and increased online interactions. And many faculty, if they're teaching a face-to-face discipline like maybe accounting or finance, aren't used to teaching online at all. They've maybe not taught online ever. And so that's an interesting dynamic that leads to two things. One is low morale. Many faculty just flat out are not going to be happy about this transition, and maybe students are going to receive the brunt of that. The good piece, though, is that many institutions are encouraging their faculty to accommodate students, to be understanding and flexible during this time. COVID-19 has required institutions, if they want to save their students and retain their students, to give more accommodations. And that's a good thing for students. It's definitely a good thing. So what's the future of higher ed? Well, many students or many colleges are going to close permanently. And I know that sounds shocking, but I've visited towns, I won't go into specifics, that have maybe 10,000 residents, but 3 colleges in them. No lie there, 15,000 residents, 3 colleges in this small town. Those are the institutions that are going to struggle the hardest during this time. Those institutions that are year to year on cash flow. Many more will experience extensive reductions. Many are looking at $10-100 million losses. So they have to recoup that in some ways, not to mention that that's just 1 year's loss. This is going to have kind of reoccurring effects as this continues to go on, because none of us know how this is going to affect going into a potential vaccine, et cetera. Few institutions will maintain business as usual. This is typically the ones that have large endowments, the ones that like the Harvards, Yales, et cetera. Ivy League schools and well-funded state and private institutions might have more business as usual as we get back to normalcy in society. And then historically, Black colleges and universities are going to be hit really hard with this pandemic. So just keep that in mind as well. If you're looking at an HBCU, it's going to be really extensive in terms of how it's going to damage them. And here's just an example. So these are closings across states since 2016 on the left-hand side. And so you can see, especially in the Northeast, many colleges, and this is a trend that's been going on a long time, but COVID-19 is accelerating this trend. You can see in the Northeast and some of these other areas, West Coast, East Coast, lots of colleges are starting to close. And you can see, I've given you a list of colleges that have closed just since the opening of this year across the United States. And I would expect this to continue to accelerate. So this leads us to quite a few opportunities when it comes to college planning. One, if you're looking at institutions that have selective admissions, colleges are dipping into the wait list. So you can imagine if they're expecting a 15% reduction in students, many students that were traditionally on a wait list and didn't have any chance of getting into the college are being asked to come to school. And so that's a really great opportunity if you have some schools in your reach bucket, which we'll talk about here in a second. If you don't like testing, many colleges are dropping testing in COVID, and this is again the tail end of a larger trend for colleges to eliminate testing altogether. And so big institutions like the University of California, et cetera, are starting to drop these standardized testing requirements. But that has another implication that we'll get to here in a second. Tuition freezes and cheaper cost structures is an opportunity. Many colleges don't think that their students will stomach a tuition increase, and so many are freezing their tuition or even discounting it. Smaller class sizes, as you might imagine with social distancing. Increased online and flexible offerings. So for some families, that's not appealing, but for many, this is going to open a brand new opportunity for many programs that were never online to be online or to be more flexible. And then it's going to create an opportunity for a more affordable pathway, which this is where it might be helpful to work with some type of college consultant to help you through this process. But if you are sending your student right now off to a really prestigious private school or an out-of-state school, and they're not getting a lot of scholarships for that experience, and they're really going for that traditional college experience, like going to sports and face-to-face classes, et cetera, while there's this period of disruption, it might be an opportunity for them to come back home, closer to home, to maybe go to a community college, a cheaper state school, continue to take classes and continue to be on that pathway towards a degree, but do it more affordably. Because if you're not going to get that experience that you're paying for out of state or at a really expensive private school, you may want to choose a more affordable pathway. So those are opening up as well in this time. Another really great opportunity is if part of your funding mix to pay for college involves loans, either at the student level or the parent level. So interest rates change every June or July in the summer, and the government just announced new interest rates, and they are historically low. So for undergraduates, we're looking at 2.75. Graduates, we're looking about 4.3 to 5.3. And for Parent Plus loans, we're looking at 5.3. So the most expensive loan that you could get, either as a graduate student or a parent, is going to be 5.3% interest, which is pretty incredible. And for those that are an undergrad and taking out as student loans, those are at 2.75. And keep in mind, this is government loans coming through the FAFSA. You might be able to even get lower rates when it comes to maybe a HELOC or a mortgage refi, cash out mortgage refi, or maybe you're getting a student loan. It might even be lower than this, which is pretty astonishing. So for the opportunity to send your kid to school and have great opportunities in terms of financial flexibility, this is an extremely great opportunity that COVID has allowed you. Next steps. So what does this mean for the college planning process? And I am a college planner. I help people through that process, but I definitely kind of like to share a lot of these tips and tricks that college planners do. So if you're a do-it-yourself type of person, you can do this on your own without a college planner. And I like offering that option. So one of the big tool sets that college planners have is this idea of having their families apply to colleges across three buckets or three categories. And those categories are safe schools, match schools, and reach schools. And so many college consultants, what the bulk of their fee is helping you research college options. So you'll put some in your safety school, which is where you'll have an easy opportunity getting admitted to those schools and it's financially viable. You have the match schools, that are the schools that your students are looking at and saying, this is a school I really want to go to. And then you have reach schools, which are schools that are maybe a little bit higher reach in terms of admissions criteria and finances, but it's still something that you want to put a few applications in that bucket. And I typically advise families to put about 5 to 8 applications across these categories. Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier is that the reach schools have become more attainable in this time of COVID-19. The next thing is as schools struggle to get enrollment, they're going to be more flexible in terms of financial aid, giving additional monies, tuition discounts. You're going to have more opportunities to maybe appeal your aid package, all sorts of things that a college consultant can help you through. But the big takeaway here is that the Reach School bucket has become an extremely great thing to utilize during this time in college planning. The next thing I want you to know is that you really do need to dig in. If you're going to smaller private schools or maybe lower tier state schools, you need to make sure that that college is going to be financially viable. It could close. That's just the reality of the situation. If you're wanting to go to a smaller private school that's maybe not like a non-brand institution, they may not be financially viable through this process. Or if they are financially viable and they continue to exist, you might see programs cut, you might see services cut, you might see all sorts of things cut, like maybe they stop mowing their grass for a while, those type of things. All the things that we have to do personally, colleges have to do the same thing as businesses. They really are businesses at the end of the day. So there's a way that you can research the financial viability of an institution just through a Google search, but then also through a Google alert, which we'll talk about here in a second. Now, community college is also a really excellent opportunity during this time. I would advise families to put some community colleges in their safe bucket when it comes to applying for colleges. And the reason is because trends when the economy goes down, community colleges enrollment tends to go up. Now, for four-year institutions, it's more of a mixed bag. Some institutions right now are seeing, like as Arizona State University is seeing an uptick, but many other state institutions or four-year colleges are actually seeing a decrease in enrollment. But for community colleges, they tend to stay stable. And so putting a few community colleges in your safe list is a great opportunity right now. And then again, strong online schools like Arizona State University, which I believe has about 250 online majors right now, they're going to continue to see strong growth. Other considerations for you here as we wrap up in this webinar, and I hope it's been helpful for you. Make sure if you have any questions, specific questions, again, you can put them in the chat feature box here in Zoom. I'm happy to answer those as we get closer to the end and I take some questions. But as testing becomes more testing optional, keep in mind that GPA and class rank become even more important. The top 3 categories for academic scholarships are going to be GPA, class rank, standardized test scores. So as that third goes away for many colleges, GPA and class rank, and some high schools don't even keep class rank because they're so competitive, GPA becomes king or GPA becomes queen. And so you really need to keep that at top of mind, that your student's GPA is extremely important during this time. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, as you're doing campus visits, whether those be virtual potentially, or and you're doing webinars with the universities, or if you're able to go on campus, maybe solo or else, if you do set up on-campus visit, you need to ask the right questions and meet with the right people. And so I would meet with someone from your department to make sure that your department isn't going to get cut during this time, that your program is still going to be around, that they're still admitting applicants. I would also meet with somebody from admissions and ask those people the hard questions. Is this college viable in terms of finances? What does the endowment look like here? How is a university coping with COVID-19? Have you seen an uptick in enrollment or a decrease in enrollment? These are great questions to ask people that maybe weren't your first questions on your list before COVID-19 hit. Then I would set up Google News alerts for all the schools on your list. So anytime there's a furlough or staff reduction or things of that nature, a lot of times news outlets are going to pick it up because a lot of times colleges employ lots of people, maybe in a small town or lots of people in a larger town. And so when furloughs happen, it hits the news. So set up a Google News alert for the schools on your list. Make sure that you're tracking the news that's coming out of those schools. That'll give you some good insight as to whether they're viable. And then high achieving students need to do research on faculty, understand class requirements, et cetera. So what I mean by that is when colleges go online with more of the requirements, you want to make sure that your faculty that's teaching that class is well accustomed to online, that they're good at rigorously kind of breaking up their courses so that students know what's expected, they know the milestones. So anytime you're online, you want to make sure that you have a faculty member that's used to that methodology and that they're good at doing it. Because the last thing you want to do is ding your GPA because your faculty member is not good at teaching online. So you can do that through a number of different things, ratemyprofessor.com. You can ask around, but high achieving students, if they want to keep a high GPA, need to know their faculty better so that they know which classes they need to take in order to have a good faculty teaching an online or a blended class. So that's all I have. Again, I am currently recording this webinar. I'm going to make it available to anybody that wants to watch it. I will probably also send it out for maybe folks that weren't able to come to this webinar. Everybody that signed up, I think we had maybe 14 that were interested in this webinar, so I'll make sure to send out the link. And I'm happy to do that. But we're a college planning firm, and we're affordable, and we have many different pricing options in terms of guiding you through that process. So if you want a 30-minute consultation and want to learn a little bit about what that looks like and how I can help your family, you can do that on our website. You can schedule directly to my calendar. It's a really easy process, and I'd be happy to discuss what that looks like. Again, no pressure here. I'm not a high-pressure sales guy. I just like to add value to the families that I work with. And so 30 minutes, we're able to kind of discuss what your needs are, and even if college consulting would be a good fit for you, because it's not for every family. But if it is for you, I'd be happy to help. So I have gotten a question here, and I want to make sure to answer that. So how does the lack of SAT, ACT requirements impact tuition assistance and school scholarships? You may be getting to it, but we'll be interested to hear your perspective on that. Yeah, good question. So as universities, which not all of them are going test optional, but as universities do go test optional, then they have to change the requirements for their scholarships that don't necessarily require that ACT or SAT score. In general, many colleges will have kind of a tiered structure. Maybe they have an automatic scholarship based on ACT and GPA. And so I would imagine as ACT becomes more optional, that they're going to be asking just maybe for GPA or class rank. But as they pull the ACT piece, then it's a lot harder to say you need this type of ACT to get this scholarship. And so I would imagine, and I would anticipate, many colleges are going to dissolve that requirement across their scholarships. And test optional, it's good if you go ahead and take it and get a good score, and you're probably going to have to take it anyway, because across those 8 colleges that you're applying to in your school list, chances are 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 of them are going to require you to take the ACT anyway. So it's good to take it seriously, to do your test prep. But for those that are going test optional, chances are they're probably going to rely heavily on GPA and maybe some things like volunteer service hours or things of that nature that might fit the specific scholarship requirements. And keep in mind too that just because a university doesn't want it, that doesn't mean that maybe a private scholarship from a private scholarship database might be asking for the ACT as a part of their requirements. So in general, I don't think it means that you're not going to be able to you're going to be able to erase it entirely out of your college planning process. It just may get you to have an advantage if you're not a good test taker in some other areas. Got another question. Are graded writing options a possible substitution in COVID times for the absence of ACT, SAT scores? Good question. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of accommodations in terms of admissions across many schools. Now, it's not going to be standardized. There's nobody really regulating higher ed in terms of any type of standard. And so I would imagine as those get removed that yes, they're going to put more emphasis on the areas outside of standardized testing. So that might be a writing sample. It might be your ACT, SAT scores. It's probably going to be a heavier emphasis on your transcript, uh, meaning honors and AP courses and making sure you get good grades across the areas that you're maybe wanting to go into. All those things are probably going to be changes in the admission piece that I would expect. Great. Hey, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And again, if you have any questions, my email, this is my cell phone. You can call or text that number. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And I will make this available as we get offline. So I'll be sharing that link with you as well. But thanks for joining us today and look forward to hearing from you soon.